I never thought my 75th birthday would be the day I'd overhear the words that would change everything. "I hope this is her last one," my daughter-in-law Sarah whispered to her friend, glancing toward me as I sat quietly in the corner of what used to be my living room. I smiled and stayed quiet, just like I always did. But the next day, I made a call that changed everything. Let me take you back to understand how we got here. 23 years ago, when my son David brought Sarah home for the first time, I opened my arms and my heart to her. She was young, ambitious, and I could see she made my boy happy. That was enough for me. When they got married, I didn't just gain a daughter-in-law. I thought I was gaining a daughter. You see, I've spent my entire adult life being the foundation that others built their dreams on. When David was 7 and his father walked out on us, I worked 2 jobs, cleaning offices at night and watching neighbors' children during the day, just to keep food on the table and pay for his Little League uniform. I remember the pride in his eyes when he hit his first home run and how he ran straight to me in the bleachers, not even noticing his father wasn't there. Through high school, when David struggled with math, I sat at our kitchen table every night helping him with homework. I barely understood myself. I dropped out of school at 16 to care for my sick mother, but I wasn't going to let my lack of education hold my son back. When he got accepted to State University, I sold my mother's house, the only thing of value I owned, to pay for his tuition. "Mom, I can get student loans," he'd said, but I shook my head. No child of mine is starting their adult life in debt if I can help it. 4 years later, when David graduated with his business degree, I was the proudest woman in that auditorium. He found a good job, met Sarah, and life seemed to be falling into place. When they got engaged, they couldn't afford a wedding, so I took out a loan against my small retirement savings. "Every girl deserves her dream wedding," I told Sarah, watching her eyes light up as we toured reception venues that cost more than I made in 6 months. The wedding was beautiful. Sarah looked radiant, David looked happy, and I felt like I'd done something right. When they moved in with me temporarily while saving for a house, I told myself it was perfect. We were a family. Sarah would cook dinner sometimes, and David would help with yard work. It felt like the family I'd always dreamed of having. But temporary, stretched into years. When Sarah got pregnant with Emma, they explained they needed to save money for the baby. I converted my sewing room into a nursery, painting it soft yellow because we didn't know if it would be a boy or girl. I bought the crib, the changing table, the rocking chair where I'd spend countless nights helping with feedings when Sarah went back to work. Emma became the light of my life. While Sarah built her career in marketing and David climbed the corporate ladder, I became the primary caregiver. I didn't mind. I loved every moment with that little girl. Her first word was Gamma, and my heart nearly burst with joy. I was the one who potty trained her, taught her to tie her shoes, and kissed away her tears when she scraped her knee. When Emma started school, I was the one who walked her to the bus stop every morning and waited for her every afternoon. I helped with homework, attended every school play, and cheered at every soccer game. David and Sarah were busy with their careers, building the life they wanted, and I was happy to support them in any way I could. Then came Tommy 3 years later, another grandchild to love, another reason to feel needed and valued. I repeated the same pattern: late-night feedings, diaper changes, bedtime stories. Sarah would often say, "I don't know what we'd do without you, Margaret." And those words sustained me through the exhaustion and the aches that came with caring for small children at my age. Years blended together in a comfortable routine. David got promotion after promotion, Sarah's career flourished, and the kids grew up calling my house their home. When they finally started talking about buying their own place, I felt a strange mix of pride and panic. Pride that they'd achieved their dreams, panic at the thought of being alone in this big house that had been filled with laughter and chaos for so long. "Mom," David said one evening after the kids were in bed, "we've been thinking, instead of us moving out, what if we just stayed? We could help you maintain the house, and the kids are so settled here. Emma's in middle school now, and moving would be hard on her." I agreed immediately. Of course I agreed. This arrangement worked for everyone, didn't it? They saved money, I had family around me, and the grandchildren had stability. It seemed perfect. But somewhere along the way, something shifted. I couldn't pinpoint exactly when it happened, but gradually I stopped feeling like the matriarch of the family and started feeling more like a live-in babysitter. Decisions about the house were made without consulting me. Sarah redecorated the living room without asking, choosing colors I didn't particularly like, but accepting with a smile because it's more modern, don't you think? Family dinners became less frequent. David and Sarah would often eat later after putting the kids to bed, leaving me to eat alone or with just Emma and Tommy. When relatives visited, they'd ask for David or Sarah, sometimes seeming surprised to remember I lived there too. Holiday decorations reflected Sarah's taste entirely. Gone were the ornaments Emma and Tommy had made me in school, replaced with matching sets that looked like they belonged in a magazine. But I told myself these were small things. What mattered was that we were together, that I was useful, that I was loved. The kids still ran to me when they had nightmares, still asked me to read stories and make my special pancakes on Saturday mornings. David still hugged me goodnight, and Sarah still asked for my advice on dealing with difficult neighbors or planning birthday parties. Last month, when the family gathered to plan my 75th birthday celebration, I was touched that they wanted to make it special. Sarah spent weeks organizing, inviting neighbors and family friends I hadn't seen in years. She ordered a beautiful cake from the expensive bakery downtown and decorated the house with balloons and streamers in my favorite colors. The day of the party, I woke up feeling grateful. 75 years old. Not everyone is blessed to see that many birthdays. I had my health, my family, a roof over my head, and grandchildren who would carry on after I was gone. I put on my best dress, the navy blue one with tiny flowers that Sarah had complimented, and spent extra time with my hair and makeup. The guests arrived in waves throughout the afternoon. Mrs. Patterson from next door, my cousin Helen, who drove in from 2 hours away, my old bridge club friends who I rarely saw anymore since the group disbanded. Everyone was so kind, telling me how wonderful I looked, how blessed I was to have such a devoted family. I found myself in that familiar role I'd perfected over the years. The gracious hostess who made sure everyone else was comfortable while staying quietly in the background. I refilled drinks, cleaned up spills, and made sure the elderly guests had comfortable chairs and weren't too cold near the air conditioning vent. As the afternoon wore on, I noticed I was spending more time in the kitchen, washing dishes and organizing, while the party continued in the living room. Through the doorway, I could see David holding court, telling stories about his recent business trips and upcoming promotion. Sarah circulated gracefully among the guests, accepting compliments on the beautiful party she'd thrown. The kids were in the backyard with some of the neighbor children, their laughter drifting through the open windows. It was a perfect day, exactly the kind of celebration I would have wanted. So why did I feel so lonely in the middle of my own birthday party? Around 4 o'clock, as the party was winding down and some guests were beginning to leave, I excused myself to use the bathroom. The powder room was occupied, so I went upstairs to my bedroom. As I was coming back down the hallway, I heard Sarah's voice floating up from the kitchen below, where she was standing with her friend Jennifer. "Honestly, Jen, I'm exhausted," Sarah was saying, her voice carrying the weight of someone who thought she was speaking privately. These family obligations are getting to be too much. Between work and the kids and taking care of her. I froze at the top of the stairs, my hand gripping the banister. I mean, I appreciate everything she's done for us over the years, Sarah continued, but she's getting so frail, and frankly, she's becoming more of a burden than a help. The kids are old enough now that they don't really need a babysitter, and honestly, having her around all the time is starting to feel suffocating. Jennifer murmured something I couldn't quite catch, but Sarah's response rang out clear as a bell. "I hope this is her last one," she said with a sigh. "Don't get me wrong, I don't wish her any harm, but I'm ready for David and me to have our own space, our own life. We're in our 40s, for crying out loud. We should be empty nesters by now, traveling, enjoying our marriage. Instead, we're still playing house with his mother. The words hit me like a physical blow. I gripped the banister tighter, feeling dizzy and sick. Her last one, my last birthday. She was hoping I would die. I stood there for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, listening to the sounds of my birthday party continuing below. People laughing, celebrating my life, while my daughter-in-law, the woman I'd sacrificed so much for, was upstairs wishing for my death. Slowly, carefully, I made my way back to my bedroom and sat on the edge of my bed. In the mirror across the room, I could see myself, a 75-year-old woman in a navy dress with tiny flowers, looking every day of her age, and then some. When had I become so invisible? When had I stopped being Margaret, the woman who raised a son and built a life, and become just an obstacle to other people's happiness? I thought about all the years I'd spent in this house, all the memories contained within these walls. David taking his first steps in the living room, teaching him to ride a bike in the driveway, his high school graduation party in the backyard, his wedding reception right here in this same house where Sarah now felt suffocated by my presence. The party continued below, but I couldn't bring myself to go back down. I sat in my room until the last guest left, listening to the sounds of cleanup and normal conversation resume. David knocked on my door around 7. "Mom, are you feeling okay? You disappeared for a while there." "Just a little tired, sweetheart," I called back. "It was a wonderful party. Thank you and Sarah for everything." "Get some rest," he said. "We'll talk tomorrow." But we wouldn't talk tomorrow, not really, because tomorrow, everything was going to change. That night, I lay in my bed, the same bed I'd slept in for over 30 years, and stared at the ceiling. Every sound in the house felt amplified. Sarah and David talking in low voices in their room down the hall, the settling of old wooden beams, the hum of the refrigerator I'd bought 15 years ago and maintained faithfully ever since. I thought about the will I'd made years ago, leaving everything to David. The house, my small savings account, my mother's jewelry, everything I'd worked for my entire life. I'd wanted to make sure he and the grandchildren would be taken care of, that my legacy would provide some security for the people I loved most. But as I lay there in the darkness, Sarah's words echoed in my mind. "I hope this is her last one." Not spoken in anger or frustration, but with the casual indifference of someone discussing an inconvenience, like hoping the rain would stop or traffic would clear up. I realized that somewhere along the way, I'd become invisible in my own life. My needs, my feelings, my very existence had become secondary to everyone else's comfort and convenience. I'd spent so many years being accommodating, being helpful, being grateful for whatever scraps of attention and affection came my way, that I'd forgotten I had any value beyond what I could provide for others. The woman who had raised a son alone, who had worked multiple jobs to pay for his education, who had sacrificed her own dreams to build his, that woman deserved better than to be seen as a burden, waiting to die. As dawn broke through my bedroom windows, I made a decision. If Sarah thought this might be my last birthday, she was right, but not in the way she expected. This would be the last birthday I spent as invisible Margaret, the convenient grandmother, the family caretaker who asked for nothing and received even less. I got up, showered, and dressed carefully in my best slacks and blouse. I styled my hair and put on lipstick, not because I was trying to impress anyone, but because I was about to reclaim my dignity, and dignity deserved proper presentation. Then I went to my desk, pulled out my address book, and found the number I needed. "Johnson, Peterson and Associates," the receptionist answered. "This is Margaret Williams," I said, my voice steadier than it had been in years. "I need to schedule an appointment with Mr. Johnson as soon as possible. I have some important changes to make to my estate planning." As I hung up the phone, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the quiet satisfaction of taking control of my own story. Sarah was right about one thing. This would indeed be my last birthday as the woman I'd been, but the woman I was about to become? She was just getting started. The appointment with Mr. Johnson was scheduled for that very afternoon. I'd worked with him years ago when I first bought this house and set up my will, back when David was still in college, and the future seemed so clear and simple. He was older now, grayer, but his handshake was still firm and his eyes still sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Margaret, it's been too long," he said, settling behind his mahogany desk. "What can I do for you today?" I'd rehearsed this conversation in my mind during the drive over, but sitting there in his office, surrounded by law books and certificates, the weight of what I was about to do felt enormous. This wasn't just paperwork. This was the moment I stopped being a victim of other people's expectations and started being the author of my own story. "I need to make some changes to my estate planning," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "Significant changes." Mr. Johnson pulled out a thick file with my name on it. "Of course, what did you have in mind?" I took a deep breath. "I want to revoke my current will entirely and create a new one. I also need to explore options for transferring ownership of my home while I'm still alive." His eyebrows rose slightly, but his expression remained professionally neutral. "That's certainly possible. May I ask what's prompted these changes?" For a moment, I considered giving him the polite, sanitized version, something about wanting to simplify my affairs or ensure better tax planning, but I was done with polite fictions. I've realized that the people I intended to benefit from my estate don't value what I've given them, and they certainly don't value me, I said. I'd rather see my assets go to organizations that will appreciate them and use them for good. Mr. Johnson nodded slowly. "I understand. Let's talk about your current assets so we know what we're working with." As we went through the paperwork, I was reminded of just how much I actually owned. The house, purchased outright 30 years ago, was now worth nearly $400,000 according to recent assessments. My savings account, built up over decades of careful budgeting and the proceeds from selling my mother's house, contained just over $90,000. There were also smaller accounts, a CD that had been automatically renewing for years, my small pension from the school district where I'd worked as a secretary for 15 years before retiring. "The house is entirely in your name," Mr. Johnson confirmed, scanning the documents. "No co-signers, no joint ownership. You have complete legal authority to dispose of it as you see fit." "And the savings accounts?" "Same situation. Your son is listed as beneficiary on death, but you maintain full control during your lifetime." He looked up at me. "Margaret, I have to ask, have you discussed these changes with your family? Major estate modifications can sometimes cause significant family disruption." I almost laughed at the understatement. "Mr. Johnson, my family has already decided I'm a burden they're eager to be rid of. I'm simply accommodating their wishes in a way that works better for me." We spent the next 2 hours crafting a new will. Instead of leaving everything to David, I divided my assets among 3 organizations: the local animal shelter where I'd volunteered years ago, the scholarship fund at David's old high school, and a nonprofit that provided housing assistance to elderly women. Each would receive equal shares of my estate. But the will was just the beginning. "Now, about the house," I said. "I want to transfer ownership immediately, but I need to be strategic about this. I don't want to create a tax burden for the recipients, and I need time to make arrangements for my own housing." Mr. Johnson explained the process of gifting real estate to charity. "We can structure this as a charitable remainder trust or a direct transfer. Given the value of the property and your age, I'd recommend the direct transfer with a life estate provision. Essentially, you'd retain the right to live in the house for a specified period or until you choose to leave, but ownership would transfer immediately." "How long would this take to finalize?" "If we move quickly, we could have all the paperwork ready within a week. But Margaret, I want to make sure you've thought this through completely. Once these transfers are complete, they'll be very difficult to reverse." I met his gaze directly. "Mr. Johnson, I've spent the last 40 years making decisions based on what other people needed and wanted. For once in my life, I'm going to make decisions based on what I want. And what I want is to ensure that my life's work benefits people who will value it. By the time I left his office, the wheels were in motion. Papers would be drawn up within 3 days, and by the end of the week, I would no longer own the house that had been my home for 3 decades. The thought should have been terrifying, but instead I felt lighter than I had in years. That evening, I sat in my bedroom, soon to be my former bedroom, and made another call, this one to my sister Rose in Florida. "Margaret, what a wonderful surprise." Rose's voice was warm with genuine affection. "I was just thinking about you. How was your birthday party?" Rose was 3 years younger than me, but she'd always been the bolder one, the one who took risks and followed her dreams. She'd moved to Florida 20 years ago after her husband died, saying she was tired of cold winters and wanted to spend her remaining years somewhere warm and beautiful. I'd always admired her courage, but never thought I could do something so dramatic myself. "Rose, can I ask you something? Do you remember when you decided to move to Florida? Were you scared?" There was a pause, and I could almost hear her thinking. "Terrified," she admitted. "I was 62 years old, leaving everything I knew, moving to a place where I didn't know a soul. But you know what? It was the best decision I ever made." "Why do you ask?" "I'm thinking about making some changes in my life, big changes." "What kind of changes?" I told her everything. About Sarah's words, about feeling invisible in my own home, about the decisions I'd made that afternoon. Rose listened without interrupting, making small sounds of understanding and encouragement. "Oh, honey," she said when I finished, "I'm so proud of you." "You are?" "Margaret, you've spent your entire adult life putting everyone else first. David, the grandchildren, even Sarah. You've given everything you had to give. And while that's admirable, it's also meant that you've never really lived for yourself. What you're doing isn't revenge. It's self-respect. I feel guilty, though, about David, about the kids. Listen to me." Rose's voice became firm. "David is a grown man with a good job and a successful wife. They've been living in your house, benefiting from your generosity for years. If they can't afford their own place by now, that's not your problem to solve. And those children? They'll be fine. They have parents who can take care of them. What they don't have is a grandmother who models self-respect and independence." We talked for another hour, and by the end of the conversation, Rose had extended an open invitation for me to come stay with her in Florida. "I have a guest room that's just sitting empty," she said. "You could stay as long as you want while you figure out what comes next. We could be those scandalous old ladies who drink wine on the beach and flirt with the grocery store clerks." For the first time in days, I laughed. Really laughed. That sounds perfect. The next few days passed in a strange kind of suspended animation. I moved through my normal routines, making breakfast, tidying the house, helping Emma with her homework, but everything felt different because I knew it was temporary. I was like an actor playing a familiar role for the final time before the show closed. David and Sarah seemed oblivious to any change in me. David went to work, came home, ate dinner, and watched television. Sarah maintained her usual schedule of work, gym, and social commitments. The kids continued their after-school activities and weekend play dates. Life in the house continued exactly as it had before, which somehow made Sarah's words sting even more. If I truly was such a burden, wouldn't my emotional distance be noticeable? On Thursday, Mr. Johnson called. "Everything's ready, Margaret. The papers are drawn up, and I've been in contact with the charitable organizations. They're all thrilled, by the way. The animal shelter director nearly cried when I explained what you were doing." "And the house transfer?" "Complete as soon as you sign. I have to tell you, the Housing Assistance nonprofit was amazed. Do you realize you're giving them their largest single donation ever? They'll be able to help dozens of elderly women avoid homelessness with this gift." Friday morning, I drove to Mr. Johnson's office and signed my name to a stack of documents that felt like the most important paperwork of my life. With each signature, I felt myself becoming more real, more solid, more present in my own existence. The house now belonged to the nonprofit. My savings were distributed among the 3 charities. My new will left my remaining personal possessions, my mother's jewelry, my books, my photographs, to Rose, with specific pieces designated for Emma when she turned 18. "There's one more thing," Mr. Johnson said as I prepared to leave. "The housing nonprofit asked me to tell you that they'd like to name the program they'll establish with your donation. They want to call it the Margaret Williams Independence Initiative. They said it seems fitting given the courage you've shown." I had to excuse myself to cry in the bathroom. Good tears for once. Tears of pride and purpose instead of hurt and invitation. That evening, I cooked what I knew would be my last family dinner in this house. Pot roast with carrots and potatoes, David's favorite since he was a child. I set the table with my good china, the set my mother had given me as a wedding present 40 years ago. As we ate, I looked around the table at these people who had been the center of my world for so long. Emma, now 13, was growing into such a beautiful young woman. Tommy, 10, still had that mischievous sparkle that reminded me so much of David at that age. David himself, 43 years old and successful in ways I'd only dreamed of when he was young. And Sarah, efficient and capable, managing her career and family with the kind of confidence I'd never possessed. They were good people. Even Sarah. I couldn't hate her for words spoken in a moment of frustration, but they were also people who had learned to take me for granted, to see me as a convenience, rather than a person with her own needs and dreams. After dinner, after the dishes were cleaned and the children were in bed, I asked David and Sarah to sit with me in the living room. "I need to tell you both something important," I began. David looked up from his phone. "Sure, Mom. What's up?" Sarah settled into the corner of the couch, half watching the television behind me. I took a breath and began. "I've made some decisions about my future, and they're going to affect all of us." That got their attention. Both of them turned to face me fully. "I'm leaving," I said simply. "I'm moving to Florida to live near Rose." "What?" David's face went blank with shock. "Mom, what are you talking about? This is your home." "Actually, it's not anymore. I've transferred ownership of the house to a nonprofit organization that helps elderly women avoid homelessness. As of this afternoon, I no longer own this property." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah's mouth had fallen open. David looked like he'd been slapped. You did what?" Sarah finally managed. "I gave the house away, along with my savings. I've established scholarship funds and supported organizations that do important work for people in need." David found his voice. "Mom, you can't be serious. This is our home too. The kids grew up here. Emma's in middle school. You can't just uproot everyone because you're feeling... What? Lonely?" I'd expected anger, but the dismissive way he reduced my decision to a temporary emotional state still stung. "David, this house has been my responsibility for 30 years. I've maintained it, paid for it, and shared it generously. Now I'm ready to do something different with my life." "But where will we live?" Sarah asked, and I could hear the panic creeping into her voice. "We can't afford to buy a place this size, not with Emma in private school and Tommy's soccer league and—" "You'll figure it out," I said calmly. "You're both intelligent, successful adults. You've had years to save money while living here rent-free. I'm confident you'll find a solution." "Mom, this is crazy." David stood up, pacing to the window and back. "You're 75 years old. You can't just start over somewhere new. What about your doctors, your friends? Your whole life is here." "My life here has been about taking care of other people. I'd like to try something different for whatever time I have left." Sarah leaned forward. "Margaret, I think maybe you should talk to someone about this. A counselor or... this seems like a very sudden decision. Are you sure you're thinking clearly?" The condescension in her voice was the final confirmation I needed that I was making the right choice. Even now, faced with the consequences of taking me for granted, they couldn't see me as capable of making my own decisions. "I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years," I replied. "I overheard you at my birthday party, Sarah. You said you hoped it would be my last one, that I was becoming a burden. Well, congratulations. You got your wish. This will indeed be the last birthday I spend as Invisible Margaret, the family caretaker who asks for nothing and apparently deserves even less." Sarah's face went white. "Margaret, That's not what I meant. I was just frustrated, and I was talking privately to a friend. I never meant for you to hear that." "The fact that you never meant for me to hear it makes it worse, not better. It means that's how you really feel when you think no one is paying attention." David sat back down heavily. "Mom, even if Sarah said something thoughtless, this is nuclear. You can't destroy the entire family over one comment." "I'm not destroying anything, David. I'm freeing all of us. You and Sarah can have the independence you want, and I can have mine. The children will adapt. They're resilient. And maybe, if we're all lucky, we can build better relationships when we're not all living on top of each other out of convenience." We talked for another hour, going in circles. They pleaded, argued, tried to negotiate. They offered compromises. Maybe they could pay rent, maybe they could give me more space in the house, maybe we could set up separate living areas. But I'd move beyond half measures. Finally, as the living room clock chimed 11, I stood up. "I'm driving to Florida on Sunday morning. Rose is expecting me. You have until then to make arrangements for yourselves." "Sunday?" Sarah's voice pitched higher. "That's 2 days from now." "I know it seems fast, but I've spent enough of my life waiting for the right moment to live. I'm not going to waste any more time." David tried one more approach. "What about Emma and Tommy? How do I explain to them that their grandmother just disappeared from their lives?" That question hurt more than all the others, because those children were the hardest part of leaving. But I'd thought about this too. You tell them that their grandmother loves them very much, but she needs to take care of herself for a while. You tell them that sometimes adults need to make difficult changes to be happy and healthy. And you tell them that they're welcome to visit me in Florida anytime their parents agree to bring them. Saturday was a blur of packing and organizing. I took only what I could fit in my car. Clothes, photographs, a few books, my mother's jewelry. Everything else would stay with the house for David and Sarah to deal with or donate as they saw fit. Emma cried when I told her I was leaving. Tommy didn't fully understand, but sensed the gravity of the situation. I hugged them both fiercely, promising to call and write, assuring them this wasn't goodbye forever. David barely spoke to me, moving around the house like a sleepwalker. Sarah oscillated between anger and attempts at reconciliation, but neither of them asked the question I kept waiting for. What can we do to make you want to stay? Sunday morning dawned clear and bright. I loaded my car, took a last walk through the house that had been my world for so long, and said goodbye to the place where I'd raised my son and lost myself. As I backed out of the driveway, I saw David standing at the front door, still in his pajamas, watching me leave. For a moment, I almost stopped the car, almost ran back and told him we could work everything out. But then I remembered Sarah's voice saying, "I hope this is her last one," and I put the car in drive. The interstate stretched out before me, leading south towards sunshine and my sister, and a future I couldn't quite imagine, but was finally free to create. In my rearview mirror, I watched my old life grow smaller and smaller until it disappeared entirely. For the first time in decades, Margaret Williams was driving towards something she wanted instead of away from something that hurt. It felt like the most radical act of my entire life. 3 hours into the drive, my phone rang. David's number appeared on the screen. I let it go to voicemail, then another call, then another. Finally, I pulled over at a rest stop and listened to his messages. The first was angry. "Mom, this is insane. You can't just leave like this." The second was bargaining. "Okay, maybe we can work something out. Call me back and let's talk." The third was different. "Mom, I I don't understand why you're doing this, but I love you. Please be safe. Please call me when you get to Rose's so I know you made it okay." I saved that last message and deleted the others. Then I turned off my phone, got back in my car, and continued driving toward my new life.